Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex topics, your carefully curated sources, and turn them into clear, actionable knowledge. You know that moment when you feel like you're talking past someone, or perhaps you've sensed a wave of collective fear sweeping through society around a new issue? Today, we're diving deep into something incredibly timely and universally human: the science behind fearing and feeling misunderstood.
Indeed. And we're drawing insights today from a pretty comprehensive interdisciplinary study. It's titled Beyond the Horizon, an AI-driven scientific study, the science of human fearing and feeling being misunderstood.
Wow, that's quite a title.
It is, and it brings together this fascinating blend of psychology, neurobiology, evolutionary science, philosophy, sociology, and even computational social science.
Okay.
Our mission here is really to unpack why misunderstanding and fear are so pervasive, how they impact us individually and collectively, and crucially, how we might navigate towards a more understood future, especially with the unique lens that artificial intelligence offers.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our sources suggest that at its core, feeling misunderstood arises from a tremendous gap between what an individual believes they are conveying and what others actually perceive. And get this, the study even notes that approximately 91% of respondents report frequently encountering this sensation. Think about that for a moment.
91%.
Almost everyone you know has felt this way.
It's pretty staggering. And what's truly striking is how fear intertwines with this feeling. Fear, it's a biologically basic emotion, right? Conserved through evolutionary history.
Right, for survival.
Exactly. It's fundamentally an adaptive response for survival. But when it converges with misunderstanding, it often exacerbates negative outcomes. It leads to heightened anxiety and sometimes even conflict.
So if this is such a universal experience, where do these pervasive feelings of misunderstanding and fear actually come from? Our sources break it down across several fascinating scientific disciplines. Let's start with our own brains, maybe, the psychological underpinnings.
Well, the study points out something quite interesting, that humans are inherently logically illogical.
Logically illogical. Okay, what does that mean?
It means our brains are incredibly powerful, absolutely, but they're also wired for shortcuts and patterns. And these shortcuts often lead to, we all are, I think. And then there's confirmation bias. This is our tendency to favor information that confirms what we already believe while dismissing or being overly critical of anything that contradicts it.
So we look for proof we're right, basically.
Pretty much. We readily accept information that fits our worldview, but become incredibly critical of anything that challenges it. And you can see how that makes bridging understanding incredibly difficult.
Definitely. And these aren't the only ones, right? The sources mention a whole list: availability heuristic, belief perseverance, false attributions.
Actor-observer bias, self-serving bias.
Yeah, quite the toolkit of ways our brains can trip us up. What's truly striking is how these individual biases aren't just isolated errors. They seem to spiral, don't they? They create this self-perpetuating cycle.
That's a key point. They trap us in misunderstanding. An initial misinterpretation can trigger negative emotions, right?
Yeah.
And that makes you even more susceptible to confirmation bias or making negative attributions about the other person.
So you start assuming the worst.
Precisely. And this can lead to withdrawal. It feels easier not to start a conversation. But then, of course, that prevents open communication and just deepens the isolation.
A vicious cycle indeed. Now, beyond the mind, you mentioned neurobiology. How does the brain itself react?
Well, fear is often that immediate automatic response, while anxiety is more of a future-focused worry. Our sources show how specific brain regions, like the amygdala, that's kind of our brain's alarm system, it becomes highly active when we feel misunderstood.
Yeah.
It triggers that sense of threat. And the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory and fear regulation, can actually be damaged by chronic fear. This makes it harder to learn from past misunderstandings and break that cycle we talked about. The insular cortex is also involved in threat detection and sort of hypervigilance.
But what about empathy? We often talk about empathy as the key, the antidote maybe, to bridging understanding.
Yes.
But in the context of these deep-seated fears and biases, how effectively can empathy truly serve as that antidote? Are there limits?
That's a great question. Empathy, the capacity to identify with and understand others' feelings, is partly facilitated by what are called mirroring systems in the brain.
Mirroring systems?
Yeah, these are neural circuits that activate when we observe someone else's actions or emotions, almost as if we're experiencing them ourselves. It involves both automatic bottom-up processes
Yeah.
and more controlled top-down cognitive perspective taking.
Okay, so there's an automatic part and a thinking part.
Exactly. Key brain regions include the anterior insula, especially for emotional empathy, like feeling someone's pain,
Right.
and the medial prefrontal cortex for cognitive empathy, understanding their viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the neurobiological connection that creates another vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Being misunderstood triggers negative emotions,
Okay.
activating the brain's fear circuitry, which then impairs the very mechanisms needed for empathy and resolving the misunderstanding in the first place.
Wow. It's incredible how our brains, with all their complexity, are wired for both connection and misfire.
It really is.
But if this is how our minds work now, how much of this is deeply ingrained from our evolutionary past? Is misunderstanding something we've been doing for millions of years?
It certainly seems that way. Fear, as we said, is an evolutionarily conserved mechanism. It dates back at least 700 million years, crucial for survival and social communication.
700 million years.
Yeah. For example, the prevalence of certain phobias, like claustrophobia or arachnophobia, may indeed be hardwired in our genes. It made sense back then.
Okay.
However, what was adaptive in ancestral environments, reacting quickly to immediate concrete threats, can become maladaptive in modern society.
How so?
Well, now it gets triggered by abstract threats like economic instability or political rhetoric. This evolutionary mismatch makes us incredibly vulnerable to manipulation
Ah, I see.
because emotional contagion, how emotions spread through groups, can be exploited through things like fear-mongering and propaganda for political gain.
So it's not just our current brain, but our ancient adaptive wiring that can lead us astray. That's quite a thought. And if we dig even deeper, it seems there is a profound, almost philosophical resistance within us to truly being understood. Is that right?
This is a really deep point in the sources, yes. The philosophical concept of self-deception and also cognitive dissonance suggests a deeper, perhaps unconscious human resistance to complete transparency.
Like we don't want to be fully seen?
Perhaps.
Yeah.
As one philosopher apparently put it, every philosopher is more afraid of being understood than being misunderstood.
Interesting. Why?
Well, the idea is if we're unconsciously afraid of what understanding ourselves or being understood by others might reveal maybe uncomfortable truths about our own biases or weaknesses, it creates this powerful internal resistance.
So it's not just external communication problem.
No, it's a profound internal conflict that can stop us from truly connecting. The sources call it almost a tragedy, where individuals spend all their time trying not to be human through defense mechanisms like isolation or distraction. And this individual resistance can also scale up to societal levels, where entire groups resist uncomfortable truths about their collective history or identity.
Which brings us to the societal level. This isn't just about individual feelings, is it? These dynamics scale up and impact entire societies in really profound ways.
That's absolutely right. Conflict, the sources note, is an inevitable aspect of human interaction, unfortunately. And misunderstanding fuels both interpersonal disputes and, crucially, large-scale intergroup conflicts.
How does that work on a group level?
Social identity theory is crucial here. Individuals define themselves partly by their group memberships, what we call in-groups.
Right, us.
Exactly, us. And we often compare ourselves favorably against outgroups them. This basic psychological process can foster group favoritism, prejudice, and stereotyping.
And that can escalate.
In extreme cases, yes, it can lead to racism and even genocide. Think about how minor misunderstandings between individuals from different groups can escalate dramatically. They get attributed not to the individual situation, but to inherent negative traits of the entire outgroup. This creates these sweeping generalizations like, oh, they simply do not understand us, or that's just how they are.
And we see this played out so clearly with misinformation and disinformation and other collective phenomena that the sources discuss. Could you remind us of the difference between misinformation and disinformation again?
Sure. Misinformation is generally false or misleading information that's shared by mistake, often innocently. Someone shares something they think is true, but isn't.
Okay.
Disinformation, on the other hand, is false information created and spread with the explicit intent to mislead. It's deliberate manipulation.
Got it. And historically?
Throughout history, these false narratives have been used to manipulate people and societies. We saw this with propaganda in World War I or the Nazi regime. And what often accompanies this is fear-mongering, intentionally provoking fear by exaggerating dangers and scapegoating, where an individual or group is unfairly blamed for wider problems.
Is there a pattern to that?
The study highlights a common, almost chilling formula. Fear plus a trigger, scapegoat. Find something people fear, introduce a triggering event or idea, and then pin the blame on a specific group.
What are some striking historical examples where we've seen this in action? The sources mention things like collective madness.
Yes, collective madness,
Yeah.
also known as mass hysteria or groupthink, where irrational beliefs spread rapidly through a population.
Like,
Well, widespread witch hunts are a classic example. Financial bubbles often have elements of this, and many political movements throughout history have been fueled by it.
and moral panics.
Right, moral panics. These are exaggerated public fears about perceived threats to societal values, often targeting specific folk devils groups portrayed as deviant or dangerous.
Can you give some examples?
Think about the Salem witch trials, obviously, the Red Scare after World War II, the Satanic Panic of the 80s and 90s.
I remember that.
Yeah. Or even more recent concerns over topics like critical race theory or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, which some sources frame as contemporary moral panics.
So there's a clear link between fear, misinformation, and these societal events.
Absolutely. The symbiotic relationship is clear. Human vulnerability to fear is exploited, often by leaders or influential groups who spread false narratives. This leads to collective anxiety and moral panics, often amplified by media, which ultimately erodes trust and fuels societal division.
It's almost like history rhymes, as they say, doesn't it?
Yeah, often seems to.
And speaking of broader societal impacts, what about culture? How does culture play into all of this misunderstanding?
Culture plays a huge role. While fundamental emotions like fear or joy are likely universal, their expression and interpretation vary significantly across cultures.
How so?
Well, different cultures have different display rules, basically, unwritten rules about when and how emotions should be expressed.
Okay.
For instance, openly expressing anger might be seen as assertive or honest in some Western cultures, but could be viewed as deeply disrespectful or disruptive in some Eastern cultures.
So even something as simple as a smile could be completely misinterpreted depending on where you are.
Precisely. The sources mention that in China, for example, a smile might sometimes indicate confusion or even embarrassment or a desire to avoid confrontation rather than straightforward agreement or happiness.
Interesting.
And silence, say in Japan or Thailand, can signify attentive listening and respect, whereas in other cultures it might be interpreted as disinterest or awkwardness.
And communication styles themselves differ too.
Yes, significantly.
Yeah.
You have low-context cultures, like American culture is often described, which prioritize explicit verbal communication, saying exactly what you mean.
Spell it out.
Right. Whereas high-context cultures rely much more on nonverbal cues, shared understanding, history, and the context of the situation. What's not said can be as important as what is.
Okay.
Even things like personal space preferences vary widely. These unacknowledged cultural nuances can easily lead to automatic misinterpretations.
And that erodes trust.
It certainly can. It escalates conflicts, both interpersonally between individuals from different backgrounds and internationally between nations. It really creates a systemic barrier in our increasingly globalized world.
This all sounds quite heavy, honestly. What are the real personal and societal consequences of living with this pervasive fear and misunderstanding? What does it actually do to us as individuals and communities?
At the individual level, the impact can be significant. Chronic feelings of being misunderstood are linked to higher perceived stress, lower life satisfaction, and motivation.
That makes sense.
It can contribute to self-doubt, insecurity, anxiety, and depression. The sources state that unsatisfying interactions are actually key predictors of poor psychological and physical health outcomes.
Wow. And what about chronic fear, especially from early life?
Chronic fear and trauma, particularly in childhood, can have profound and lasting effects. It can lead to conditions like PTSD, mood disorders, and it can even impair executive functioning, things like planning, focus, self-control. Yes, resulting in things like lower academic achievement, intellectual impairment, decreased IQ. The impact on development can be severe.
And it obviously affects our relationships too, right? Because if you can't communicate effectively or you're constantly misinterpreting each other.
Exactly. Miscommunication acts as a fundamental barrier. It prevents relationships from deepening, from building real intimacy and trust.
And those false attributions you mentioned earlier.
Yes, where we mistakenly assume negative intentions behind someone's actions, those can lead to deep resentment and severely erode trust over time. Think about a couple where one person constantly attributes the other's forgetfulness to carelessness instead of, say, just being overwhelmed.
Right, that builds up.
It really does. And for children exposed to trauma and chronic misunderstanding, it can result in patterns of conflicted relationships and chaotic lifestyles that can persist well into adulthood.
Is there a neurobiological basis for this relationship impact?
Yes, there is. Feeling understood actually activates reward centers in the brain. It feels good, literally. While feeling misunderstood activates regions associated with negative affect and distress.
Okay.
As we touched on, chronic stress from fear can literally disrupt brain architecture. It can damage the hippocampus, which is vital for memory and regulating that fear response.
So it becomes harder to cope over time.
Exactly. It creates this cumulative, even intergenerational toll, where unaddressed issues, unhealed trauma, predispose the next generation to similar vulnerabilities. The cycle continues.
And on a grander societal scale, what are the repercussions when fear and misunderstanding become widespread?
On a societal level, it severely damages community relationships. It erodes trust in institutions, which is fundamental for a functioning society.
How does that happen?
Well, when institutions themselves, whether governments or media or other powerful groups, use fear as a means of control or manipulation, it cultivates deep cynicism and pervasive distrust among the population.
I can see that.
This erosion of trust contributes directly to social division and polarization. It makes civil discussions incredibly difficult, especially on sensitive or complex topics. People retreat into their own groups.
And that relates back to social identity theory.
Precisely. Social identity theory helps explain how that in-group favoritism, that us versus them mentality, can escalate into intergroup hostility when fueled by fear and misunderstanding.
And the end result?
The culmination of these factors can lead to economic and political instability. And as we discussed with collective madness or mass hysteria, these phenomena have historically resulted in destabilization and societal shifts, often negative ones.
So it's a negative feedback loop.
Absolutely. A feedback loop of societal fragmentation, where manipulation actually becomes easier because people are already divided and distrustful, which then further divides society. It's a dangerous cycle.
Okay, so given this really complex picture of human fear, misunderstanding, our biases, our history, where does artificial intelligence fit in? This seems like such a human problem. Can AI actually help us navigate this incredibly intricate terrain?
It's a great question, and the sources suggest AI offers some really unparalleled capabilities for analyzing human behavior, especially at a scale we've never seen before. This is mainly through the field of computational social science.
Computational social science.
Yeah, it's an emerging field that leverages big data, computational power, to measure and model human behavior with a precision that was previously, frankly, thought impossible.
So what are the different ways AI can help us here, specifically with fear and misunderstanding? Can it really bridge that tremendous gap we talked about between what we intend and what others perceive?
Well, there are two primary approaches within computational social science that our sources highlight. First, you have machine learning and AI in the more sort of pattern recognition sense. This excels at identifying patterns in vast data sets. Think about predicting consumer behavior, things like that, in relatively stable settings. The aim is often to imitate and then surpass human capacities for prediction.
And the second approach?
The second is agent-based modeling, or ABM. This is quite different. It's more like setting up a miniature simulated world inside a computer.
A simulation.
Exactly. You create individual agents. You think of them like tiny virtual people. Give them simple rules based on psychological theories or observed behaviors, and then you watch how their interactions lead to complex, large-scale social outcomes.
So ABM helps understand the why.
Precisely. It helps us understand why certain patterns emerge by connecting abstract ideas or biases to concrete actions of individuals and then seeing the observable outcomes at the group level.
So it sounds like we really need both approaches then, the big data patterns from machine learning and the understanding of individual choices and interactions from agent-based modeling.
It absolutely seems that way. A hybrid approach would likely be the most powerful way to untangle something as intricate as fear and misunderstanding.
How would that work in practice?
Well, you could imagine combining MLAI for pattern recognition, maybe identifying populations or communication styles prone to misunderstanding with ABM, to then simulate the potential effects of targeted interventions.
Like testing solutions.
Exactly, like simulating the impact of empathy training programs or specific communication strategies within that simulated environment. This moves us beyond just prediction towards a deeper causal understanding and potentially designing effective intervention strategies.
Could AI even analyze our own communication?
Potentially, yes.
Hmm.
Imagine AI analyzing communication patterns, maybe in text or even voice, to point out where language might be ambiguous or where cultural assumptions might be causing friction. It could even suggest ways to phrase things for clearer understanding across different groups.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And what about using AI to look back? Can it help us understand the patterns of misunderstanding in history, maybe so we don't keep repeating them?
Yes, that's another promising area. AI is revolutionizing historical research. It can perform enhanced pattern recognition across huge amounts of text, automate data analysis, even do some predictive modeling based on historical trends.
What kinds of patterns could it find?
It might uncover subtle underlying prejudices or overlooked perspectives in historical narratives, helping us get a more balanced understanding of the past. And crucially, AI serves as a powerful tool for unmasking the repetitive nature of human conflict.
Like that formula you mentioned.
Exactly. By sifting through vast historical data sets, news archives, political speeches, personal diaries, maybe AI could potentially identify those recurring patterns, like the fear plus a trigger, a scapegoat formula, far more systematically than humans can alone.
So it could help us learn from history more effectively.
That's the hope. By highlighting these destructive cycles, AI could potentially help us recognize them earlier and maybe, just maybe, disrupt them in the future.
That's incredibly powerful. But of course, AI also brings up some really important questions, ethical questions, especially when we're dealing with sensitive human emotions like fear and misunderstanding.
Absolutely. Critical point.
How do we ensure it's a tool for good and not something that makes things worse?
That's a central challenge, and the sources really emphasize the need for two key things: explainable AI, or XAI, and really robust ethical frameworks.
Explainable AI, what's that?
XAI aims to make AI systems transparent and understandable. It's about designing AI so it can explain what has been done, what is being done, and what will be done next, and crucially, which information these actions are based on.
So it's not just a black box giving answers.
Exactly. That transparency is fundamental for fostering user trust, especially when the stakes are high, like with human emotions.
And does that help with our biases when we interact with AI?
It does, yes. Because we humans are prone to biases like confirmation bias, right? When faced with advanced AI models operating as black boxes, we might fall into either algorithmic aversion, distrusting AI simply because we don't understand it,
Okay.
or over-reliance, where we trust it blindly, even if it's wrong. XAI directly addresses this. By revealing the AI's reasoning, it allows us humans to check in, evaluate the basis for its conclusions, and avoid making false attributions about the AI itself.
So transparency builds trust and helps us use AI more wisely.
That's the idea. It's critical for ensuring we accept and act upon AI's insights, especially when they might challenge our own preconceived notions or biases. But we absolutely have to talk about the risks, too. Algorithmic bias is a major one.
How does that work?
AI learns from data. If the data used to train it reflects existing societal biases, the AI can inherit and even amplify those biases. This can lead to inaccurate classifications that are discriminatory in nature.
So AI could misunderstand people in biased ways.
Yes. If the training data lacks diversity, for example, the AI might misunderstand the emotional expressions or communication styles of certain groups in predictable, unfair ways.
And then there's privacy and the potential for manipulation. That sounds quite worrying.
Those are profound concerns, absolutely. Privacy and consent are critical. The sources stress that users need explicit and informed consent over how their data, especially emotional data, is used, and they need the right to withdraw it.
And manipulation.
The potential for manipulation is significant. Emotion recognition technologies in particular can have a dual-use bias,
Dual use.
meaning they can be used for entirely ethical purposes, maybe helping people understand their own emotions better, but they could also be used for unethical practices like hidden surveillance, manipulative advertising, or even social control by governments or corporations.
That's a scary thought.
It is. While there's enormous potential for good, if AI helps individuals understand themselves, there are substantial implications if it automates the ability to read or control others' emotions without their knowledge or consent.
So what's the solution? How do we manage these risks?
It comes down to responsible AI development and governance. Building inclusive, diverse datasets is crucial. Actively detecting and mitigating representational imbalances in data and algorithms. conducting regular fairness assessments and audits of AI systems.
And strict rules.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Strict ethical guidelines and regulations are needed, especially for sensitive applications. Without them, AI could inadvertently amplify the very problems of misunderstanding and fear it seeks to address.
Okay, so this deep dive has really shown us how deeply intertwined fear and misunderstanding are. They shape our brains, our history, our societies, individually and collectively.
Hmm.
But the good news, I think, is that understanding these mechanisms also points towards concrete solutions. So let's talk about that. What can you, listening now, do to bridge that tremendous gap in your own life?
Yeah, it really requires a multifaceted approach, starting at the individual level. First, consciously working on enhancing communication and empathy in your daily
What
interactions.
does that look like practically?
It means actively striving for clarity in your own communication. Remembering that illusion of transparency. Don't assume people know what you mean,
Spell it out more.
maybe. Or check for understanding. And crucially, getting curious. Instead of making assumptions when you feel misunderstood or confused by someone else, ask questions.
And listening better.
Active listening is absolutely key. That means focused attention, making eye contact, asking clarifying questions, and maybe paraphrasing back what you think you heard just to confirm your understanding. So what I'm hearing is,
Right, it's about consciously putting yourself in someone else's shoes, too.
exactly, consciously practicing empathy, trying to make more compassionate attributions for behavior. Maybe they're having a bad day, maybe something else is going on, giving people the benefit of the doubt.
And understanding subtext.
Yes, trying to understand the subtlety of what's left unsaid. Paying attention to tone and body language, within cultural context, of course. Promoting emotional literacy is also vital,
Especially for kids.
especially for children, yes. Helping them identify and express their own emotions clearly is essential groundwork for them to be able to empathize with others later on. Storytelling is a powerful tool here, discussing character emotions and motivations.
And tackling our own biases.
That too. Learning not to jump to conclusions, trying to become aware of your own cognitive biases, inaction confirmation bias maybe, or attribution errors. It's ongoing work for all of us.
And at a community level.
Finding like-minded people, cultivating supportive social circles, these can act as buffers, significantly reducing individual feelings of misunderstanding and helping manage collective anxiety when things feel uncertain.
Okay, so those are individual and small group actions. What about fostering healthier societies overall? Societies that are more resistant to these cycles of fear and misunderstanding.
This involves actively working to reduce prejudice and intergroup conflict. Things like supporting peace-building dialogue initiatives, promoting education that helps people understand the psychological mechanisms behind in-group bias and stereotyping.
And tackling bad information.
Absolutely. Combating misinformation and deliberate fear-mongering is crucial. This requires cultivating critical thinking skills in the population, promoting media literacy, encouraging mindful media consumption. Don't just react, evaluate the source.
And leadership matters here, presumably.
Responsible leadership is indispensable. Leaders, whether political, community, or business leaders, have a responsibility to actively avoid exploiting fear and misunderstanding for their own gain. Instead, they should prioritize unity, transparency, and accountability.
What about the cultural misunderstandings we talked about?
Addressing those systematically is key. Explicitly discussing cultural differences in communication styles or values, rather than letting them fester as unspoken sources of friction, can significantly de-escalate tensions. This is fundamental for effective global collaboration.
We also learn about the really profound impact of all this on child development. What are some practical strategies for nurturing what the source calls a good child? One who is perhaps less prone to misunderstanding or being manipulated by fear.
The early years are indeed a critical window. Creating safe and nurturing environments is paramount. Consistent warmth, affection, respect from caregivers. That builds a secure base.
And the emotional side.
Promoting emotional literacy, as we mentioned, helping children identify and validate their feelings, letting them know it's okay to feel sad or angry or scared, and teaching them healthy ways to express it.
Teaching empathy skills directly.
Yes, teaching active listening and perspective-taking skills from a young age. Encouraging kindness and community engagement, getting them involved in activities where they interact positively with diverse groups.
What about digital life?
Mindful digital engagement is increasingly important, teaching kids to navigate online interactions thoughtfully, to be aware of online manipulation tactics.
And gender norms.
That's an important point raised in the sources, too. Challenging rigid societal gender norms that may restrict emotional expression, particularly perhaps in boys, and promoting emotional literacy for all children.
So the idea is a generation raised with strong empathy and emotional literacy.
We'll be inherently more resistant to manipulation by fear-mongering and better equipped for constructive civil discourse, even when disagreements arise.
Okay, finally, let's bring it back to AI one last time. Given its power and potential pitfalls, what policies and ethical frameworks do we need to guide AI's interaction with humanity to ensure it genuinely helps us build a more understood future?
Responsible AI governance is paramount. We need comprehensive ethical guidelines, especially for sensitive applications like emotion recognition or social behavior analysis.
Like what specifically?
Transparency and explainability that XAI we discussed should ideally be mandated for high-impact systems. Strict regulations concerning data privacy and user consent are absolutely essential.
And bias.
Active bias mitigation strategies and regular fairness audits need to become standard practice in AI development and deployment. We also need clear frameworks for assessing dual-use risks.
To prevent misuse.
Exactly. To anticipate and prevent AI systems from being easily repurposed for unethical objectives like pervasive surveillance or social manipulation.
What's the overarching goal?
The overarching goal has to be human-centered AI. AI that is designed explicitly to enhance human well-being, autonomy, and understanding. This implies maybe a new kind of social contract for the digital age.
A social contract for AI.
Yeah, where AI development and deployment are guided by core principles of human dignity, equity, fairness, and collective well-being, ensuring that this powerful technology supports, rather than undermines, mutual understanding and trust in our societies.
We've certainly journeyed through the intricate science of human fearing and feeling being misunderstood today. We've gone from cognitive biases and neurobiological loops, through historical moral panics and cultural nuances, all the way to the transformative yet complex role of AI. What stands out most to you, having taken this deep dive with us?
If we connect all these dots, it becomes incredibly clear that misunderstanding isn't just an occasional individual communication failure. It's a deeply rooted human phenomenon with neurological, evolutionary, and social dimensions. And critically, it can be systematically exploited. But our capacity for empathy, for conscious effort in communication, for critical thinking, that's the critical antidote.
So the past shows the patterns.
Exactly. The past reveals these recurring patterns of conflict and manipulation. The present demands our urgent attention to these dynamics playing out right now. And the future really hinges on our collective commitment to fostering understanding, not division.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now, as you navigate your daily life? I think it means that fostering a future characterized by understanding and resilience isn't just some grand societal goal out there. It's something that begins with individual efforts right here, right now, in how you choose to communicate, how you make an effort to listen, and how you critically engage with the information swirling around you.
And perhaps it leaves us with an important question to ponder. In a world where AI can analyze patterns of fear and misunderstanding at an unprecedented scale, what is our individual and collective responsibility? How do we ensure that this powerful knowledge is used to empower understanding and connection, rather than to refine methods of control through division? What active steps might you take, starting today, to consciously try and reduce that tremendous gap in your own interactions?
This is DigitView.